If you love gardens, then you will love Chelsea, because you will find that perfect flower, the tree that will transform your own back garden, that magical place where you could sit with your favourite mug and just feel the garden settle all around you. Whatever it is you're looking for, whatever fires and inspires you, you will find here, because Chelsea is for everyone. Hello and welcome to the Royal Horticultural Society's Chelsea Flower Show 2019, an event supported by M&G Investments. It's the opening day of the most talked about week in horticulture. From the exquisite perfection of the flowers to the exacting intricacies of the show garden designs, it never ceases to inspire and influence.
Chelsea may well be a grand affair, but it really has something to offer for every gardener. And our team of award-winning designers and plant specialists will be here all week on the BBC, so you too can get a bit of the flower show magic at home.
You getting the magic?
I am. I'm feeling it this year. I think there's great quality out there throughout.
Well, I think one of the things, you and I are lucky enough to get in here early. We have a walk around. Very quickly, you see actually the game has been up. There's some good stuff this year.
Yeah, some brilliant plants as well. Green is the colour of Chelsea this year. There's no doubt about it.
It's very green, and it seems to be more trees.
Yeah.
We're in a wood. We're in a dark green wood.
Yeah, trees and woods throughout, but lots of quality here.
OK, time to get going. Coming up tonight, some of Chelsea's greatest alumni have returned this year, including the winner of last year's Best Show Garden. And we'll be catching up with Chris Beardshaw to see if his design is in the running again.
And competition for Best Show Garden doesn't come more fierce than Andy Sturgeon, who's back after a 2-year break. We find out why an Australian beach inspired his garden. Winning designer Adam Frost will be peeling back layers of this year's gardens to reveal some of the design tricks you can try in your garden at home.
And I will be catching up with the Deputy Political Editor John Pienaar to discover how gardening provides a welcome break from the cut and thrust at the front line of Westminster. But first, I'm in the Resilience Garden, designed by Sarah Eberly. Now, she has an extraordinary CV here at Chelsea. She's won gold in every single Chelsea category, more than anyone else. And this is her first main avenue garden since 2011. And it is both arresting in terms of design, but also it's making a really important statement, because the garden is really focusing on the resulting effects of climate change and then the resulting pests and diseases that will follow in its wake. So it is recycling materials. You see on the ground that you have mixed reground material there. It's recycling water that comes through the back. It's looking at different environments, wetlands, drylands, meadows, that will enable gardens to adapt and to respond to situations that are changing all the time. And I've got Sarah with me here. Sarah, very nice to see you back on Main Avenue.
It's wonderful to be here.
What was it like?
Oh, fabulous. I love it, but I'd forgotten how much hard work it is.
Really? I mean, it's a big garden. I mean, it's a big space.
Yes.
What was the major challenge?
Well, I think the complexity of the planting, and that's the one that worried me the most. Being an organic garden, it was reasonably easy to put it together, but the planting was a real challenge, and because you do your planting quite late on, not knowing whether you fulfil the potential of your idea is quite stressful.
But the idea is a big one.
Yes.
I mean, it's probably as big as it could be. So how do you whittle that down to a garden?
Edit button. I always say when I'm talking to anybody who's a designer, remember the edit button is the most important, and that anything that's superfluous, although could be very charming, must be removed, and it's just being strong to that core message.
And just, it's worth repeating, what is the core message in a phrase?
The core message is about diversity in the face of climate change and the threat of pests and diseases, and that we all have a responsibility to help create that diversity and create genetic strength within our plants, gardens and our landscapes.
Because you've got some very diverse trees here. Do you think we need to be introducing those more into our gardens?
I think we do, because our trees are undoubtedly under threat, you know, with ash dieback, and we've lost all our elms, etc. And actually, we don't have that many native trees, and you think of the range of them. So we've got to be looking at alternatives that we can use as well.
And what's the one thing that you hope the average gardener will take away from this?
Really some inspiration of actually they can make a difference, they can do something. There's so many messages in this garden, and so hopefully some really inspirational bits of planting for people to be able to copy themselves.
Well, I think there is both an awful lot to see first time round, but even just coming past here a few times, I'm getting more and more from it.
Good.
And I'm sure visitors will too.
Good, thank you.
Nice to see you back at Main Avenue.
Thank you.
I'm in Joe Thompson's garden, which this year is inspired by an 18th century pottery workers' village. But if you think it's going to be grey and industrial, well, think again. Because classical columns cast shadows across rills of water with a soft palette of roses, verbascums and peonies, all tying the theme together beautifully. Now, Joe, we are in, well, this is what we call the rock bank. You've dug it all out completely.
Well, yeah, it normally is almost like a cliff face. It starts off quite shallow there and goes right up there. But I wanted to let the visitor be able to look into the garden. So we've dug down, moved loads of soil away. And then also by doing that, we can use all this space above us as well. So it gives you a lot more space.
No, it's great because the visitors, it's like a sunken garden now and they're looking down. And water is a major feature of the garden, but of the theme as well, isn't it?
Yeah, because Josiah Wedgwood was one of the first people to embrace the canals and use them to transport his wares. So I wanted to have water in this garden. So we've got this pool and the rill flowing out through a little pool on the other side.
Yeah, I think it's and the textures. I mean, we've been talking about the texture of the stone. There's sort of a little platform there.
Yeah.
And it's an accessible garden, isn't it? It's actually a garden. You can. I mean, we've got a lot of landscapes here at Chelsea, but this is a garden people can really relate to, I think.
Yeah, I wanted to create a real garden. So there's a seating area, there are water features, and there are these colonnades to give a kind of almost semi-cloistered feel.
Yeah, and the planting. I mean, it goes beautifully with your dress. I'm sure you coordinated the whole thing together. But you know, that soft palette. You know, how do you go about? Because you also got shady areas and you've got sunny areas, and you have to sort of blend those two together quite cleverly, don't you?
That's right, and what we use are kind of plants that we call our friends when we're planting. We have our friends, so that this year it's the Valeriana officinalis, beautiful valerian, which is happy in semi-shade but also can come out into the sun, and that ties all the planting together, and it's a bit more muted over there underneath the trees, and then it travels round the garden and we get brighter and brighter until you've got this kind of exuberance of pinks and oranges and peaches over in this corner, and we've got this lovely verbascum which I adore, and then of course the roses.
Yeah, it's cool. And also the rusty feel. I mean, you've got this fantastic rusty wall at the back, a great backdrop, and you know there's a sort of rusty tone coming through the grasses. It's as if you've designed the whole thing, you know, as a Chelsea garden somehow, Joe.
Well, who'd have thought it?
But it has been beautifully conceived and beautifully executed too. The angelicas as well, you know, the bees are all over the angelicas. So it's great for wildlife as well.
It really is. When the angelicas came in, as soon as they came in, the bees were on it and they haven't left it since. And again, the Valeriana is good for that. And they're loving the flowers with the more open centres that they can get into.
Yeah, well, Joe, it's lovely to see you again. From Joe to Show, have a great show. Enjoy yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also back after winning last year's Best Show Garden is Chris Birchall. This year, he's defending his crown with a garden with sustainability at the centre of its design. Sophie Rayworth went to meet him during the build-up to this year's event.
This is the quiet garden, isn't it?
It is. We only have to whisper.
And the reason for that is that you have electric diggers.
Yeah, this is it in full operation.
Are you feeling very chilled out in there?
Yeah, Peter. Honestly, you can't get Peter out of the cab. He loves it.
It's really rather soothing.
What we're trying to do is to deliver the fabulous aesthetic of the English garden, but we want to do it with a much lighter footprint. Every process has been analysed in terms of, well, is that the best way of doing it? To make a very lightweight garden that still delivers the same emotional reward that we all want.
Obviously, we've got the digger. What else are you doing?
We've got a building at the back here, which is going to be a slate building. So there you go.
Wow.
It's genuine slate.
That, when you carried it out, it looks solid,
Yeah.
but hang on, it really is malleable,
Yeah.
isn't it?
But it means that you can construct an incredibly lightweight building, which of course in turn reduces the environmental footprint. Not to say anything about the fact you're not transporting huge pieces of slate hillside around. The glulam beams, I mean, there's thin veneers of pine, which is then bonded together, and it has pretty much the same structural stability as something like steel. And yet, of course, it's a sustainable resource because it's a timber. This is all pioneering stuff. So we wanted to give all of these things a bit of a platform at Chelsea.
You're what, 8-9 days in? How's it all going for you?
Yeah, fine. I mean, it's you know, you have a good day and then you have a not so good day. And this morning wasn't so good with the weather, but you just
Bit
have
wet.
to get on with it.
The slate cladding, it looks fantastic.
Yeah, well, that's just the first stage. So it's been fixed on, but it looks pretty effective from here, doesn't it? You'd never guess that it was just 2 millimetres thick.
No. Chris, this tree is spectacular.
I mean, the tree itself is just stunning. You know, it's one of those things that when you see it, you've got to find a place for it, and it deserves a place in Chelsea. And in fact, the big yew that's behind you there, that sits nestling in this kind of space here as if the tree is kind of interacting with the curvature of the taxus. And the two are just kind of interplaying and creating a front to the garden. And then once you venture underneath the canopy and across the canal, then you enter a more floral area of the garden. So in a way, this is a kind of edge of terrace.
So you're on course, you're on track. 10 more days.
Yeah, is that how long it is?
I think so.
Is it 10 days?
I think so. Well, it's looking great, so I'll let you keep going. This is what Chris Beardshaw does every single year. He screens off the garden after a few days and then you just can't see inside. And normally I'm not allowed to go in, but this year we're following him, so I am getting in there, which is quite exciting. Wow. Where is he? Where is he? I can't actually see him. There you are, hiding. The hidden garden, and I found the hidden gardener. This is absolutely sensational. I mean, it's properly breathtaking in the truest sense of the word. There's so much to look at, and it just, everything leads you on, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, that's great if you're picking it up, because in a way what we're trying to do is contrast the sort of volume and mass and simplicity of the hemispherical yews, and then the complexity and detail of the herbaceous perennials that are running through it. And the idea is that everywhere you look, there's a little bit of detail. You know, there's an agapanthus or an iris.
The whole sort of green, eco, recyclable, how's that going?
Well, you can start to see now on the glulam, so that's a paint which is not only petroleum-free, but it's also plastic-free. And everywhere you look, these little brown tote pots, they're the recycled pots that we've been growing our plants in.
Just having seen it, you know, 10 days ago when we were sort of standing in mud, to this, and it really does have a real sort of magic about it. I really mean that, a sort of magical feel.
This one I'm yet to fall in love with. You know, I like it, the components are working, but it just hasn't quite clicked for me yet. But then that's the way it works. I think the next day is critical, really. You know, come back in 2 days' time. May as well have taken it out and started again.
Brilliant. Well, very, very impressive. I'm not, I shouldn't be surprised. I'm not surprised, but I think you've, done it again, Beardshaw.
Well, we'll
done
see.
it again.
We'll see. There's a long way to go. Thank you.
Chris, question has to be asked. Do you love the garden now?
I do. It was a long time coming.
Really, why?
Because I think sometimes you get involved in a project and immediately there's a kind of resonance. And sometimes you hope that it's going to work and the bar is set high, and for whatever reason it doesn't quite deliver aesthetically. I wasn't feeling that emotional connection. It took a while. I mean, the trees and the taxus at the front, the canal, all started to work. As soon as the herbaceous perennials started to go in, and I started to see the bounce of colour, the rise and fall, the play of textures, the diagonal vision lines, that's when I thought, actually, this is starting to work. And that's the point at which the garden tells me what to do. Up until that point, I'm telling the garden what to do, and that's a magic point.
I have to say, standing here, I wish the public could see this because it's absolutely lovely, this viewpoint.
Well, I mean, it's interesting you say that because, you know, what we tried to create a bit of a refuge at the end here where you know, the supposed gardener of this space would be able to sit and contemplate and feel apart from the show. So I'm glad it's working. It is that constant dilemma, though, that you face as a designer at a show like this. Not only does it have to be viewed from the two sides the public can see, but it also has to be viewed from within. And it's curious, because, I mean, this kind of circuitous path that comes down here is hidden from that side of the garden.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you have to pander to the judges, because without success, or however you measure it, I mean, with you, in your case, presumably the bar is set so high that it has to be extreme success, then there's total failure. But on the other hand, presumably you want the public to love you. They want you to love the garden.
Do you know that, honestly, and I'm asked this question a lot, you know, is the medal important? And of course it's important. If you get the right colour medal, it's the most important thing in the world. But there's no point getting the right colour medal if it doesn't connect with the gardening audience, if it doesn't push those emotional buttons. And so for me, I'm kind of old enough to actually be largely dismissive of what the medal represents. It's much more about the comments that you hear from people who are viewing. I love standing two back in the queue, listening to whether people are reading the garden in the way that I envisaged it. You know, 12 months ago.
Well, tell me, I mean, briefly, because we've got a week ahead of us, and I'd be very interested to hear at the end of the week what people are saying. What are they saying so far?
I'm quite surprised that the colour, the way that the colour's resonating through, the moody, smoky, the blues, the greys, the purples, punctuated by pinks and whites, that is exciting people. The fact that it's just unabashed, herbaceous, perennial border, rising and falling textures and colours. You know, for me, I just love those sorts of comments because that's what I grew up on. Those are the gardens that I love going to visit. And in a way, that's what I've got known for doing, is playing around with herbaceous, you know, weaving a tapestry together.
You're talking the language of love now.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I didn't mean to.
It. It's good. It's good. Now, it's not just the designers displaying innovative ideas at Chelsea. There's a dazzling array of new plants and hybrids in the Great Pavilion. And Carol has been to select a few of her personal favourites.
Outside on Main Avenue, it's all about lush greenery. But in here, it's all about colour, and a lot of it is from brand new plants. Here on Thorncroft stand, we've got two new introductions. Well, the first one is Megan, very topical, in this lovely sort of claret and magenta colour. And she'll start blooming in about May and go on for a couple of months. But she'll have another lot of flowering later on, in September perhaps. Really easy to prune. Just cut her down to about half the height you want her to grow. Over here is Sugar Sweet Blue. Isn't it lovely? And it gets its name because it's scented. It's dainty, it's delicate, and above all, it's colourful. This is Plants A Go-Go. They're famous for their heucheras. Recently, they've been awarded 8 awards of garden merit for their heucheras. That means these are really garden-worthy plants, suitable for British gardens. This is their new introduction for Chelsea. It's called Heuchera Burgundy Bill. Always remember when you're growing heucheras to deadhead them when these flowers are finished, and then they'll just make more. Harkness have been breeding roses for ages. This is Chawton Cottage. It's a lovely rose, a climber. Just as important as pruning is the way you train a climbing rose. If you want masses of flowers, you want to tie in all those laterals. Bring the vertical down to the horizontal. That will induce lots and lots of flower formation on all the side shoots and mean that you're rewarded with a fabulous show right the way through the summer. This really caught my eye. It's a brand new introduction. It's called Salvia Amethyst Lips. This is a plant whose flower colour changes with the weather. Initially, when it's not too warm, it's deep, rich purple. But as the temperature rises, it gets these lovely white lower petals. And eventually, when it's really hot, it becomes pure white with just purple splashes here and there. It's a really exciting plant. I think it's a plant with a future. The Great Pavilion is home not just to nurseries, but to floristry too. Beauty, innovation and tradition meet here in one of the most talked about floral competitions. Mark Lane has been along to take a closer look at some of the entries.
Floristry is so popular at Chelsea, it has its own area in the Great Pavilion, where amateurs and professional florists have been coming for years to showcase their incredible craft. Open to industry professionals over 26 years of age, the RHS Chelsea Florist of the Year aims to hunt out the very best talent. Finalists were tasked with creating a wearable royal floral crown to commemorate 200 years since the birth of Queen Victoria. The competition offers us a glimpse into the direction of floristry. In other words, what's in store for the flowers that you and I will see, for example, at weddings and at birthdays. Florist to the stars and royalty, Simon Lycett is with me to analyse the trends and innovations. Hello, Simon.
Hello.
Hello. What's caught your eye with this one?
Isn't it just exquisite?
It really, really is. And this is so different.
And I think that this is the one that is so brave. It's couture, so they've really gone for it here. Gorgeous plant material, really original.
I agree, and I really love the way the equisetum's been used. It's quite architectural. It's almost sort of construction-like.
And there's a very repetitive motif, which makes it a very strong visual design. It's beautiful. I think really brave, and looking around, compared to all the others, is quite a daring decision to make.
I think I'd agree.
Come and look at some of the others.
Superb.
I love this one. So delicate.
It's really beautiful, isn't it? It reminds me of like a Millet painting.
It's also very on trend, the use of a meadow-like type of plant material and all in water, no flower foam, is very, very on trend at the moment. The sort of thing that people do at home.
And the archways sort of remind me of like a garden arch, where you have the scrambling roses and the ivy over them. It's beautiful.
And you're allowed a certain element that's not plant material, and there's just these lovely little portraits which are just added amongst it.
Which makes it really intimate.
Really intimate. Come and see one that's not so intimate. Isn't this just wonderful?
It's mad. I mean, it's 4 times the size of all the others. It must weigh quite a bit.
Well, the schedule says it should be no heavier than 5 kilograms and wearable.
Wow. Well, it's also got this sort of Highland fling to it, hasn't it?
It's got all that wild, the organic feeling that really has simmered down and we're going to see along the high street florists.
It really is Queen of Hearts. Thank you so much, Simon. We'll be revealing the results a little bit later in the week, and we'll also see how the RHS Chelsea Young Florists of the Year fare on Thursday.
Whilst the show gardens on Main Avenue will certainly get most coverage in the papers, the small gardens are actually equally as important, as they reflect the limited space many people have, particularly in built-up urban areas. Arrett is on Royal Hospital Way to find out more about small gardens with big ideas.
The space to grow gardens are 1/3 of the size of the majority of those on Main Avenue. This year, there are 9 designs, and the one that's got everyone talking is the Facebook garden. You can kind of guess where I am, but tell me specifically where you designed this garden to be.
It is inspired by a landscape, and the landscape is the Basque Country in northern Spain. The way I've tried to bring that inspiration into the garden is through the use of some quite dramatic rock formations.
I do like the way that you've kind of utilised plants of one theme.
They come from all over the world, but they share that ability to survive in a coastal environment.
But the other thing about this garden is the angle of it.
So I wanted to show how you can increase your sense of space. And the 30-degree angle that we've designed the garden on lengthens the vistas that you can get through the garden and increases the perspective.
You know, a water feature in a garden is great, but you've given it this real ebb and flow as if you literally are sat by the edge of a beach.
For me, the sound of waves is the sound of the coast, and I think for all of us, it's an instantly recognisable sound of that particular landscape.
How have you managed to sort of tease out the sort of personal inspiration that you had?
I think the thing that if you can take an idea that really matters to you, and you can apply that idea through every element of the design, do that with whatever it is that inspires you, you can make a small space really, really full of meaning, you know.
Well, I think it's really lovely that you have taken that personal detail and then displayed it into a garden, and a show garden as well, so well done.
Thank you very much, Erin. That means a lot to me.
Chelsea designers spend months, often years, planning the structure of their gardens because no matter how beautiful their plants are, if a path is in the wrong place or the shadow from a sculpture doesn't land precisely where they want it, they know the garden will never really work. So throughout the week, Adam Frost is going to dissect the landscaping within the gardens and reveal their design secrets. Tonight, he's finding out why height can add a new perspective.
Gardens are getting smaller all the time in our country, and we're starting to run out of that horizontal surface to play with. So why not just think up? I know I look good behind bars before you say it, but if you're going to add height and structure to your garden, timber has got to be the easiest way to go. And this construction is simple but beautiful. You could do it at home. The other thing I like is they've gone big and bold with the timber in a small space, and that can be incredibly effective. And there's a planed finish which makes it tactile. You can enjoy that grain. And the last but not least is this timber is picked up in the furniture, which gives the whole space a really cohesive finish. It's lovely. Sometimes designers don't just add structure and height to the garden for you to move under. Sometimes it's to lead the eye, and that's exactly what this does. I know the colour might not be everybody's taste, but the beams are staggered as they go along and they draw the eye, and it arrives at this beautiful green roof. You know, this little detail here just stops me in my tracks. It's just pebbles set in a steel framework. What it does is it makes the entrance more interesting. Something like this would make a fantastic archway at home, maybe frame a beautiful view, but at the same time, it's adding height to your But this is really cool. That is an office, and I'm sure my kids would love it. But the interesting thing is, once I'm raised up in a space, I'm viewing the trees very differently. It sounds totally different to being on the ground. But if you can't actually add height to your garden, maybe have a look at the view from the house, a bedroom window. Here, I'm looking down on water and really sort of wonderful, interesting shapes. So maybe next time you go out in the garden, you could take that design to new heights.
Still to come from the RHS Chelsea Flower Show 2019, an event supported by M&G Investments. I'll be talking with BBC News' John Pienaar as he reveals the welcome solace his garden provides in this politically turbulent era. Many of the show gardens are continuing a trend with wild and free planting. And Rachel Detame will be sharing some of the basics behind this much sought-after look. And hoping to strike gold for an 8th time here at Chelsea, designer Andy Sturgeon tells us what inspired his return after a 2-year break.
Now, you just can't miss the beautiful foxgloves that are towering over the planting of many of this year's gardens. So it's clear that Chelsea's love affair with these wildflowers continues. And over in the Great Pavilion, one couple have been championing foxgloves for the past 3 decades. And we went to meet them as they prepared to bring these fabulous plants here to Chelsea.
I just think they're so evocative of really the English garden style. Those tall, stately spires in a multitude of different colours are always popular. I think planting in a natural style is definitely the way forward, and foxgloves fit that bill absolutely to the letter. There is potential for the whole of Britain to be covered in foxgloves. I'm Terry Baker, and with my wife Mary, we run the Botanic Nursery in Atworth, Wiltshire. So here we have Digitalis purpurea, which is the wild foxglove. The foxglove has got this almost symbiosis with the long-tongued bees that it prefers to pollinate it, and you'll see the little spots within the floral tube. Those directs the insect into the back of the flower, and whilst it's enjoying the nectar, of course it takes the pollen and distributes it to other foxgloves. Those little hairs within the floral tube are designed to make sure that only the long-tongued bees, the bigger bumblebees, can actually get in there. There are lots and lots of different forms. There is Candy Mountain, and you can see into the flowers, which is very exciting. There are things like Limoncello, which was runner-up Chelsea Plant of the Year a couple of years ago. So there are foxgloves of almost every colour and type, all descended from the wild purpurea types. They don't like being put into pots. But as far as the garden's concerned, just plant them straight where you want them to grow, and they'll very soon get the message and they'll take over your entire garden, given half a chance. What I'm trying to do is create a group of white foxgloves which are going to flower over a long time. This big old plant will flower very quickly, set masses of seed, which will provide you with the young plants for next year, and then these medium-sized plants will flower in turn a little bit later in the summer and provide you with even more seed. And lastly, if we're to plant a little group of seedlings or young plants, then these will flower the following year. So you're going to get seeds and flowers over a long span of time, which will give you a self-flowering group very much quicker than just planting one age. This is Digitalis excelsior. When I'm at Chelsea, one of the things that people are always impressed with is the sheer size of these things. This will easily get to 7 feet. It's one of the tallest that we grow. This one now would be just under a year old. The weight of the flower is quite substantial, so we have to be very careful to make sure that they stay as straight as possible. This one's got a little bit of a bend in it, but I think in amongst all the other foxgloves, hopefully the judges won't notice. I think when we're putting the displays together, we've always got the thought at the back of our mind that we're trying to emulate in some very humble way the artistry of Monet. Monet was so wonderful at using shadow and pinpoints of colour in his compositions, and I've always got that in mind. We grow about 2,000 foxgloves just for Chelsea. The best of them so far are in this house. These are the ones that we will do the final selection from, and they'll be the ones that will actually go to the show. This is our new foxglove, Digitalis smoothie cerise. It's very sun tolerant, and this gorgeous creamy flower with the suffusion of rich rose purple on the outside. We're putting it up for Chelsea Plant of the Year, so that's going to be exciting, and we hope it's going to do well. I first visited the show probably at the age of 15, which is a very long time ago now. I participated in my first display in the early 1980s. You know, I have no idea how many I've done. It's sort of lost in the midst of time. I tend to live from one show to the next. Already we have our baby foxgloves for next year's Chelsea developing. I think for those who come to the show looking for inspiration, the thing I would suggest is that explore this idea of creating a naturalistic effect, of creating a garden which is in harmony with the things that live in it and all the other plants that grow.
And I'm with Terry and Mary now. Terry, do you think you've got the Monet feel you were looking for here?
Oh, I'd like to think so. It's a brave statement, but those little pinpoints of dark and light that Monet and all the Impressionists were so keen on, we've picked that up, I think.
You've achieved it solely with foxgloves.
Yeah.
It's pure artistry. Mary,
yeah.
You know, you're worried about getting bends and kinks in your foxgloves.
Yeah.
They look pretty straight to me. I think you've done a
I'm
fantastic
quite
job.
impressed with that, yeah. There's a bit of a trick to it, though, which fortunately the judges can't see at the moment, so that's good.
No, come on, you've got to let us in on the trick.
We use a little cane at the bottom and wire it, so that's hidden.
So, oh, I see. So it's
Tiny bit of wire around the cane and the stem of the plant. That usually works.
But we can't do that in our own gardens, can we?
No, but in your own gardens, they're established well in the borders before they send up that beautiful flowering stem, so they don't need that kind of support in your gardens, unless you're really, really windy and unfortunate. But,
well, that's true.
Yeah.
And then how did you, I mean, transporting them, how was it getting them here?
Transport is always, it always seems to work, but there's always a potential nightmare, because you can undo 18 months of work in the last 5 minutes.
They're the most trickier plant. I mean, they're delicate, they're tall.
Yeah.
You
they
know,
bruise easily, you know.
Do you lose a lot on the way?
Do you know we have to grow 1,000 plants to be able to select the 250 or 300 that we actually use.
Okay.
So
it's about a quarter to a third.
Luckily,
actually
they all go in our garden, so that's okay.
And then there's your new variety, Smoothie Cerise, made the front of your exhibit looking beautiful there.
Yeah, we're very pleased with that one, because for the first time we've got a foxglove now that will grow in total light, total sunshine, as well as the sort of half shadow that foxgloves traditionally like.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, as a garden designer, it's a sort of plant that you can weave through sunny borders into shade. You can link those spaces together beautifully.
Yeah, and with the grey leaves, it's a great sort of background plant.
Fantastic. Well, thank you.
Gives you a nice bit of height towards the front of the border as well, which is always useful.
Yeah. I'll be using it in the future, no doubt. Enjoy the week. It's a beautiful exhibit.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Well done.
Thanks very much.
Well, foxgloves are classically part of a looser, wilder style of planting design, which we're seeing plenty of at Chelsea this year. Rachel de Tame is analysing some of the show gardens to pick out the building blocks of this trend.
One of the key design inspirations here at the show this year is undoubtedly a more naturalistic way of planting. And on this garden we've got a little slice of Finland, and it's really beautiful, very subtle too. So you've got things like the trees, the Betula pendula, which is the national tree of Finland, and then a very unassuming little tree here, a little willow called Salix caprea. But it's vitally important because in Finland, after the really long, cold winters, this flowers really early in spring. And so it provides nourishment for bees, for other pollinating insects, for butterflies and moths. It's all very relaxed, and that might mean a very relaxed gardener too. I think this garden has so many planting ideas that we can borrow if we're looking for a sense of naturalness without wanting the whole garden to descend into wildness. And I think it's all about how you put the plants together. And we're used to being told to group them in 3s and 5s and 7s, and then you get these lovely mounds of different plants that complement each other. But here they've taken the same quantity of plants and dotted them around in a much freer fashion. But you've got this lovely, really green understory with the ferns, and coming up through that, like the valeriana, the iris iberica, and they just sort of dotted through like arrows pointing skyward. And the other thing is that this garden reminds us that you can have a natural feel but still have colour. Things like the camasias and that wonderful lupin. I love the fact that that's a solitary lupin. As if in nature, things just self-seed, they grow where they want to grow. Well, that one's just popped itself over there, and why not? It really is a very beautiful garden. I love the irony behind the naming of this garden. It's called the High Maintenance Garden for the Motor Neurone Disease Association. And it shows what might happen to a previously very cultivated space if the owner isn't able to maintain the garden to that standard anymore. And actually, I think it's wonderfully encouraging, very refreshing. You've got plants really that seem to have grown where they've landed. And then we just walk through a trodden path down through what frankly are, well, most people would consider weeds. But there are cultivated areas still. You can see the astrantias and the hostas, but I think it just shows that perhaps we all need to just be a little bit more easygoing about our gardens. Let nature in, let all of those important insects and wildlife into our spaces as well. I'll tell you what, it makes me feel an awful lot better about the fact that I don't have time to go home tonight and do the weeding.
As Deputy Political Editor of BBC News, John Pienaar has been reporting at the front line of breaking stories from the heart of Westminster for, it's nearly 40 years, isn't it?
I remember reporting the Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, as a youngish, fresh-faced, new rookie Prime Minister, which tells you quite a lot in answer to that.
You don't look old enough to do that. Well, this is a big change. Are you a gardener?
I've got what I think is a lovely garden. Yeah. It's a walled old garden in South London, not too far from here on the other side of the river. We've got some lovely old trees and some old English plants and so on. It looks lovely. I can take no credit whatsoever for that. My wife is the artist in this, as in most things. I provide the appreciation and a kind of willingness to pour the drinks from time to time.
But, I mean, the enjoyment of gardens, particularly coming from your world, which is very intense, must be significant, and a lot of people will share that.
A lot of people here, a lot of people watching this will know exactly what you're talking about. It's a haven, it's somewhere to just now and again to escape and switch the world off, and where time slows down just for a minute, and you can look at the sky and not think about the stuff which is on your mind the rest of the time, whether with friends or your family or just on your own, which is sometimes just as nice, isn't it?
Is this your first visit to Chelsea?
I've been a few times in the past, usually wangling a trip to come into the Chelsea Flower Show just to talk to people with a microphone. I do a Sunday morning radio show, and I talk to people and sometimes get those voices on air. And it's a place to talk to a certain slice of British society. It's not a cross-section, as you know, it's not a petri dish. It's a certain slice of Middle Britain, the slice that maybe has a lovely garden, or wishes that it does, or certainly appreciates, which is a particular kind, if you like, of Britain. Mainly probably middle class, not necessarily very young, but interesting to talk to. There's a strain of thought there which is important at any time in the political cycle.
This year, what do you see in the gardens that reflects your world? Is there any connection, or is it all escape?
I think it has a lot, well, no, not just escape, but maybe you could also say it's about reflection, which is also an important part of what you do when you're sitting in your chair in the garden thinking about, you think maybe nothing at all, but you never think about nothing at all. You're taking a break and thinking about other things, maybe at a slower pace, and maybe there's some value to that. You can't help wondering if the argument about Brexit between politicians was taking place not in oak-lined chambers at Westminster, but in a beautiful garden, I don't know if it would mean the conclusion would be different, but the conversation would certainly have a different tone to it, and who knows, maybe the outcome would be different too.
I've often thought that politics would be greatly improved if politicians had to have an allotment. It came with a job, you know, your foreign secretary had plot number 47 and so on and so forth. I'm only being slightly facetious. You're implying that it's a very humanising influence, gardens.
I do believe that. I think look, I guess you know way better than I do. At a flower show or a competition, you probably get savage, you know, blood on the walls level of competition. But it is, I think, overall a civilising influence. It has a calming effect on the soul. You mentioned politicians. Jeremy Corbyn famously has his allotment. I think he's maybe more into vegetables than flowers, but I think that must have some kind of beneficial effect on Jeremy Corbyn. There's a beautiful rose garden behind number 10 Downing Street.
I filmed in it.
You've been there. A couple of roses there. One of them named after Winston Churchill that David Cameron planted. Maybe some politicians would benefit from having flowers named after them. You can have a lot of fun with that around your next dinner table.
Can't possibly comment on that, but
nor can I.
Thank you very much for coming and sharing your experience with us. It's great to see you here. Thank you, John.
Andy Sturgeon, designer of this year's M&G garden, is a true Chelsea legend. He's picked up the award for Best Show Garden twice and an impressive 7 gold medals here. But after a 2-year break from Main Avenue, we were keen to find out what's inspired his Chelsea garden this year.
I've always been obsessed with plants. I'm absolutely passionate about them. I can see design in everything really, whether it be form and texture and just the way that the light falls upon something. The last time I was at Chelsea was 2016, and I wasn't planning on going back so soon, but actually it's an opportunity I couldn't resist. Being able to express yourself in this way with design is something really quite unique. I'm Andy Sturgeon. My style tends to be quite contemporary, but I always use natural materials like stone and timber. I'm not actually a trained designer. I'm a frustrated sculptor and a frustrated architect. I tend to get inspiration from anything around me, whether it be art or architecture or nature itself. I've exhibited at garden shows all around the world, but Chelsea Flower Show for me is still the pinnacle. I first exhibited at Chelsea in 2001, and I think this will be my 9th time at the show. And I've been lucky enough to win 2 Best in Shows, including the last time I was there in 2016. What that means is that the pressure that I feel on myself is absolutely enormous. The starting point for this year's garden was actually a rock formation which I saw on a beach in Australia. What I loved about it was that behind the beach you could see the way that plants were colonising the stone and the rocks, and I was really absorbed by the power of plants, the way that they can immediately colonise and regenerate something that's potentially barren. I work in my studio right in the heart of Brighton, and this is really where the creative process begins. Making a model is a really important part of the design process for me. This is really the starting point because it helps me to look in and see all the different angles, all the different vistas, and to see how all the spaces are arranged. The timber formations that run down through it, they create these really strong vistas so that you can imagine the views that the public will get when they look down through it. And then from the long side of the garden, they act really as a backdrop to all the planting. It's kind of layered up, and so I can really begin to understand how the plants will look in front of the timber and how the trees will create the different shapes. I first met Johnny Woodford more than 20 years ago, so when the idea of this garden came up, he was the obvious choice to collaborate with. He tends to work in wood, and he's really taken the idea and turned it into something quite spectacular. So that's good, where you've cut right into it like that. It's really dramatic.
Give it more depth.
Yeah. So how long do you think this oak will last then?
Well, I think it lasts forever. I mean, there's no sapwood there, and the burning process will give it more longevity.
Each time I see it, it's turned into, you know, it's taken another leap forward.
It was tricky to start off with, but the oak was kind of in control, and it took, seems like weeks before I started to boss the wood.
Yeah. I remember there was a kind of a moment where suddenly it all made sense, and it was
it's
all starting.
It's when I started putting vertical cuts in.
Yeah, when you start getting angry with it. The basic concept for the garden is about ecological succession. Everywhere you look in a woodland, you can see the way that plants colonise things. And the moss and the ferns are actually very primitive plants. They're amongst the first plants that you get with primary succession, where plants colonise a new barren landscape. And as it happens, I love ferns. They're amongst my favourite plants, and I've got literally hundreds of them in the Chelsea garden. When a tree actually falls down, that's known as secondary succession because it's an opportunity. The light floods in through the canopy, and then the seed bank can come to life. In this case, it's all the bluebells that have been sat dormant in the ground. But in the Chelsea garden, I'm using willow herb. As the show approaches, I think it's fair to say that the anxiety and nervousness just builds. in the last year while I've been working on this, you're very much focused on the design, and now the dawn of realisation comes that you're putting your head above the parapet and being scrutinised by your peers, which isn't a great feeling, I have to say. And at this point in the game, I've got my fingers crossed, but I don't know how I'm going to do.
Andy, your garden is stunning. It's the first time I've been on it, and it's got such a sense of place. There's a lot of greens at Chelsea, but this is how to do green.
Thank you.
Are you pleased with the results here?
I'm absolutely delighted, I have to say. You know, when you're planting a garden particularly, it sort of takes you on a journey. I don't have a planting plan, I have a lot of plants, and then I sort of put them together almost like doing a painting, so you don't really know how it's going to turn out, but you start to find your way, you get into your stride, and you start seeing things come together.
The backdrop of these, you know, these huge timber structures as well. I know you saw a natural landscape, but did you feel it was a little bit of a gamble? Because they're very dominant, but they just play with the planting beautifully, don't they?
I've got to say, I did think it was going to be a huge gamble with the sculpture, and when I've seen them over the last sort of 4 or 5 months being put together as well, on their own without the planting, you think, wow, these are going to be powerful. And I genuinely thought that it would alienate quite a lot of people, but already listening to people's reactions, I think the planting, because it calms it down, it somehow makes these big dramatic things sit in quite almost a pretty sort of garden, really.
Yeah, and I've seen the garden in light now, but I've also seen it in sort of quite a dull light, and it still sings out beautifully, especially against the black backdrop. You talk about putting pressures on yourself. How are you feeling right now?
Well, probably the most relaxed I've felt for about a year.
Yeah, and you talk also about, you know, you're a frustrated architect. How does that come across, would you say, in this design here?
I like to use quite big structures. So the hard landscape in these platforms, they're quite big, they're bold, but I like to have an enormous quantity of planting as well. You know, I'm not a minimalist. And I love having those two things together, but if you think of this sculpture as architecture, it's creating vistas down through the garden, it's creating backdrops in the way that a garden wall might, or a building or something like that. So it's performing all of those functions, and it's defining the space. That's really what all of these sculptures are doing.
You know, it's got movement, it's also the drama. I mean, for a Chelsea, you know, garden, it's got drama, and it's got that wow factor that we all want.
I've got to admit, I slightly stole the idea from something which I saw in the pavilion, and I know you've seen it year after year, the fantastic auricular theatre, where they have a black backdrop with those amazing plants displayed in front. And I always knew that I could put these black structures in and put any plant in front of it, and it would look amazing.
So you stole this whole idea from the auricular guys. And it's a wonderful garden. It's just so lovely to be on it. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Earlier, Her Majesty the Queen arrived for a tour of the Chelsea Showground for what is said to be one of the highlights of her year. And Sophie Rayworth joined the royal party.
She's 93 years old, and Chelsea has always been a firm fixture in the Queen's diary. She's only missed a handful of shows throughout her entire reign. This year is very much a family affair, with her grandson's wife, the Duchess of Cambridge, having helped to design one of the gardens here. The first garden that the Queen is visiting today is the RHS Bridgewater Garden, which has been designed by Tom Stewart Smith.
I made a garden for her in 2002 for the Golden Jubilee at Windsor. You know, I said, you know, do you remember that? He said, yes, it's still there.
Oh, wonderful. Well, the Queen wasn't going to miss this. There she is on the garden that the Duchess of Cambridge has helped to create. And the Duchess has been down here at Chelsea many times over the past few weeks during the build, helping to plant up that garden. What did she think of it?
Well, the final message she said was, how did you fit everything into that garden?
Yeah. First-time designer on Main Avenue. What a week you're having.
A fantastic week. It's really exciting. And we've just met the Queen.
I can't believe
What can't you believe?
that she came to our garden. It's
Really?
fantastic. It's worth the year's worth of work.
And the final garden that the Queen is visiting this evening is the M&G garden, designed by Andy Sturgeon.
You look like you were having a lovely time with the Queen there. What did she say?
Well, she was interested to see, and she's noticed it around that the place is full of bees and butterflies and that sort of thing. Once you bring a few plants, and she said it was good that people are beginning to latch onto this sort of thing. She is always genuinely interested, which is great.
There's no question that the royal visit's really important and matters to everybody here. And it was a great privilege and fascinating to meet the Duchess of Cambridge and see just how committed she was to her garden and, quite frankly, how good it is. It's great.
Yeah,
I love it.
She seemed to really enjoy the whole process as well, you know. Yeah. Fantastic. So I saw her looking around some of the gardens earlier, the other show gardens, and it'll be interesting to see which one she likes. But I'm going to ask you which one you like, or you think actually is going to win Best Show Garden this year.
Not
Stick
always
your
the
neck
same
on the
thing.
line, Monty.
It's not always the same thing, because the one I like.
Okay, no, good point.
So I'm going to write down here, but I'll get it right.
You didn't last year, I don't think.
Well, yeah, I was unlucky. I was unlucky.
Yeah, well, there's only 11 to choose from. I'm going to, the judges obviously got it wrong.
And if you say the same as me, I will accuse you of copying.
Okay, and put your name on the front, obviously, so we know it's yours, so you can't get out of it later.
No. All right, there you go, that's done.
There you go. Now, for the last few years, we've enjoyed answering some of your social media questions about the Chelsea Flower Show using the hashtag #AskMontyandJoe, and we've already got a few today. Are you ready?
Away, yeah.
Quick fire round.
Right.
Diane Marie Richmond says, what is your favourite flowering garden plant that you've seen at Chelsea?
I think in a year with a sea of green, which I like, actually is a brightly coloured, it's the Canary Island foxglove, marvellous touches of sort of marmalade-y orange.
Yeah, it's a beautiful plant.
Yeah.
But it's not fully hardy, is it? So you couldn't grow that outside.
But it doesn't stop it being lovely.
No, that's true.
What about you?
I'm on trend, you see. I've gone for a green flowering plant on Andy Sturgeon's garden, Disparum. I think I've got Green Giant that I grow in London, and I think he's got one called Black Heron, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Like almost like a small bamboo, but it's got green now downward nodding flowers. You should get. They would do really well in your garden.
I will.
They would like the moisture. Okay, Heather Schultz asked, last year's Chelsea gardens were dry with sand and stone. This year is more fresh, green with natural planting. What do you think causes swings in style from year to year?
Well, there are trends and fashions in gardening, but I think probably this year it's about safety. It's woodland, narrowed horizons, green. I think it's a comfort zone.
Yeah, I think so. There's something that's safe. I mean, the woodland as well. Do you think it's part of the zeitgeist at the moment?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, if you have any questions about Chelsea for me and Monty, use the hashtag #AskMontyandJoe.
And you can follow us on Twitter and at GWN Shows using the hashtag BBC Chelsea or on our Facebook page. Now, what a way to start a week at Chelsea, but that is all we have time for tonight. Joe and I will be back tomorrow revealing the medal results and, of course, the most prestigious award of all, the RHS Best Show Garden.
Angelica Bell and the Rich Brothers will be on BBC One at 3:45 p.m. with a first glimpse of some of the medal-winning gardens and plants. But from us tonight, it's good night.
Bye-bye.